It's time for the Phil Ferguson Show.
This is Phil Ferguson, and you are listening to The Phil Ferguson Show. Well, a bit of good news since I last talked to you about a week ago. I got officially accepted into the American Italian Cultural Society, Cultural Society. Yes, I think it's Cultural Society. Over in the Joliet area, actually in the city of Crest Hill. So I got to go to the member meeting on Wednesday and meet some more people, and some of them speak Italian, and I'm going to have great fun. I think on Thursday, I got volunteered. I got volunteered to help with the spaghetti dinner, which goes from like 10 or 11 a.m. till 7 or 8 at night, and there's cooking and preparation before and cleanup afterwards, so I'm not quite sure how long I'm going to be there, but Thursday I may be hard to reach. So I've got that fun going on with my life, just trying to do something that's not related to everything else that I'm doing. Later in the show, we have an interview with Leighann Lord, and she does comedy routines, and she's been on all these big network TV stations and comedy shows. She's written at least one book, if not two. One book, very funny book. Her tagline is "Very Funny Lady," so she's going to be on the show. But we're not really going to talk about comedy. She was on the show a couple of years ago. This time, we're going to talk about aging parents, which kind of ties in a little bit with my rant. I think it was the previous episode about bankruptcy and debt and insurance and all the shit that people do to elderly people and senior citizens. So if you liked that little bit of a rant, we're going to expand on that and hopefully, fingers crossed, provide you some suggestions and ideas, the things that you might be able to use if you're in the situation where you have aging parents. If you're 25 years old and this doesn't mean anything to you, good on you. Maybe you skip it, maybe you enjoy it and listen to and learn something new about something that maybe my kids should listen to it to help handle me in a few short years as I age. I'm not that old, but anyway. So we'll have a talk with Leighann and ideas of doing it with aging parents. And in the Investing Skeptically, I'm going to talk a teeny bit about the market. We're going to talk about Vanguard's new lower fund costs. And we're going to have great fun, so take a little musical interlude, and we'll get on with the show. For our Investing Skeptically segment today, I've got a couple of brief things. First of all, I have a letter and I guess an offer, a generous offer, and it's someone who is in the Cincinnati area, and of course, I will be there for the American Atheist Conference on Easter weekend, and they were kind enough to offer me a place to stay. I had to very politely decline because I'm staying in the conference hotel because you never know what's going to happen at the conference or people that want to hang out, and the last thing I want to do is figure out how to drive to somewhere else or walk to somewhere else if it's close. It's just, for me, it's really, really nice to just be in that hotel. But thank you very much for that offer. And I'm going to read a little bit from the email here. She's offering this because of the impact you have had and continue to have on both of our lives. Coming from a family where our grandfather was the pastor of a church and our father was a youth pastor, our deconversion as adults shook us to our core. My sister and I are amongst a few members of our family who do not subscribe to evangelical Christianity. And yours was a voice that helped us to clarify our own thoughts along the way, along with the many guests you've introduced us to via your podcast. So thank you. I am honored. And every once in a while people say, maybe I should just talk about money, which could be boring, or maybe I should always talk about atheism, which would also bore me. So that's why I have the mix. But it's nice that I was at least in some way helpful to somebody. The email in another part also says, we've also become big believers in index funds since we've started listening to your show, and I've decided to pursue a career in finance. I don't mean to sound like a fanboy here. I guess I just want to say that we appreciate the influence that you've had, and we'd like to show our gratitude. So thank you. Thank you very much for that very, very kind email. I appreciate it very much. Another thing that has come up, many times people have asked me to do like a review of different apps and programs. And the one that's come up most recently is Robinhood. And apparently Robinhood is doing a lot of marketing, a lot of advertising. So a lot of people have become aware of it. And in the past, I did a very detailed review of Acorns, where the short is, I said, don't use it, flat out, don't use Acorns. If you want more information, go back and find the podcast on that, or send me an email. I can send you the link, or just kind of walk you through the logic. I don't want to do that again here. So people keep asking me to do other ones. That takes a lot of time to read through and find all the documents. But I did give a quick look at Robinhood, and I didn't see anything that sends off alarm bells that this is a big problem. One of the things that was wrong with Acorns is the investments weren't held in your name. That's a deal breaker, let alone the other things. But in Robinhood, I don't think that's the case. The problem with Robinhood, and the problem that generally applies to almost all of these new whiz-bang ways of investing, is that I don't want you buying and selling individual stocks in the first place. So that alone makes me say, don't use Robinhood. Now, if you really, really, really want to buy a handful of stocks and take on the risk of a handful of stocks and test your mettle against everyone else and try to pick and choose stocks, it looks like it's going to be okay. However, you can also do that at virtually any brokerage firm. Now, almost any brokerage firm is going to have a couple of dollars in trading costs every time you trade. I don't know that that's inherently bad, because it makes you pay attention and think about your trades more. If your trading is free, I'm concerned that it might encourage you to trade more often. And there's other expenses you have to worry about. And it's one of these things that when you get to really low expenses, a $7 or $8 or $4 trade versus a $0 trade, the difference is a few bucks, and it's not unvaluable. But if you're that worried about $4, why are you buying and selling individual stocks during the day or during the months or during the year? Maybe the focus is wrong. You're so worried in the last couple of dollars. There's also problems potentially with execution. Execution is you put in the order with the platform, and then they have to go and either they have a seat on the floor, or they contract out with somebody who has a seat on the floor, or they sell your trade to somebody who has a seat on the floor and they want to make the trade. And it's a bizarre world that I don't fully understand, that someone might want to pay you a couple of bucks for the privilege of doing the work of selling your trade. How do they make money on that? I'm not quite sure, honestly. And some websites said that Robinhood does more of that than someone like Schwab might do, or that Fidelity might do. So they make a little bit more money that way and a little less money from you. Of course, there's a laundry list of fees and services for other things that aren't the trades, like a cash advance, or they want you to invest on leverage, so they'll loan you money. And of course, if you're borrowing the money from them, maybe the rate isn't the best and they make up more money that way. So again, they're encouraging you to do trading activity that I don't like. They're encouraging you to leverage your investments, which I definitely don't like. So I guess I would say with Robinhood, it's okay. I don't see anything really screamingly wrong with it, but it goes against the core of my investment philosophy, which is buy and hold in the long term and use index funds. So if you're going to ignore all of my advice and want to use Robinhood, fine. But, whatever. So there's my thoughts on it. And that goes with a lot of other things. Another thing I'm debating is I've been contacted by many, many people about having ads on the show. And a lot of them, I just laugh at them out of hand, but I could also, through the podcast platform, allow ads. So I'm contemplating that because there's extra money for me to pick up. So I don't know. I'm conflicted about that. So if you have any real clear thoughts on why that's a great or a terrible idea, email me, phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com. The other thing that has happened recently, and I keep meaning to talk about it, and I don't think I have covered it in great detail. Many of the listeners will know that several months ago, Fidelity launched zero minimum and zero fee index funds. And again, there's ways that a company can make money on the index fund or you as a client on other things, so they can do that. Vanguard has not followed suit exactly yet anyway. And again, you're getting down to a point where at Vanguard, your expense ratio for the total stock market index might be 0.05% versus Fidelity, which is 0%. Are there things going on within the fund where the fund manager can make a few more dollars or a few tenths of a percent, and your overall return might be lower even though it's free to you? I don't know how that's going to work out yet. The data that I've looked at before says that the Fidelity fund, while charging you less, returns less money than the same fund at Vanguard. So the net effect is that you might be better off at Vanguard if you have a few $1,000s. If you have $200 and Fidelity is the only place that you can buy the total stock market index, okay, you don't have a lot of options. You have $200, you have $800. So it's not a bad thing. Definitely not a bad thing at all. And it's a nice thing for people that are just starting. You can go open up an account at Fidelity and put in next to nothing and link it to your bank and add money there. They don't have a fancy schmancy app that's really hip and cool with the youngins today, the 20-year-olds and the 30-year-olds, to put on their phone and look at it. I don't want you looking at it every day anyway. So don't worry about the really cool interface on your phone. Get a good and solid investment. So what Vanguard has done now is on a whole bunch of funds, and I looked up the number, but now I've forgotten it, and it doesn't really matter, but something like 40 to 50 funds that had Admiral shares at $10,000 for a minimum investment of that position. They've lowered it to $3,000, which was the minimum for the normal shares. So for $3,000, as an example, you can get the Vanguard Large Cap Growth Index Fund or the Small Cap Value Index Fund, and a whole bunch of other funds that you can buy into with only $3,000, and you get the lower cost of the Admiral shares. So that cost structure might have gone for you as an individual investor from 0.09 to 0.07 or 0.05. So it's lowering your cost structure, which is nice, and it's passing on the savings to you. And so the question is, does that change anything specific about my advice about what to invest in at Vanguard? I haven't given that enough thought yet, but I'm kind of leaning towards no, it doesn't. So if you have a few $100 and you want the total stock market at Fidelity, you can do that. There's no minimum. At Vanguard, unfortunately, with only $1,000, you can only get the target date funds. To do anything beyond that, you still need $3,000. And of course, you're not going to retire on 500 or 1,000 or 2,000, but maybe you're getting started. Starting at Fidelity is fine. Starting with a target date fund that's 2050, 2055, whatever you think you might retire if you're in your 20s or 30s, is also nice because it has very little bonds in it. But if you want to go all stock market at Vanguard, you need $3,000 to get the total stock market index fund. It used to be the individual shares, but now you can do the Admiral shares and you cut your cost a little bit. So at $3,000, you can do the U.S. total stock market. How long do you do that? Previously in the past, I would say up to $50,000. You just keep putting it in there. If you want to put 80% in there and 20% in international or 25% in international, once you get to $20,000, that's not going to bug me that much either. But doing the splitting up of the 6 different positions in the U.S. market, you can now do for under $50,000. I'm still kind of leaning towards don't bother, because the little extra bit of money that you could make, and this is all theoretical, is going to be offset by the work that you're going to do to track it, to maintain it. And if that is not something you enjoy doing, the cost is not going to be worth the benefit. So maybe you make a few extra $100, maybe you make $300 extra, maybe you make $800 extra, but you're engaged in all the work and the tracking. So it's not necessarily bad, but for a lot of people, they're just not that interested. They're just not going to do it. And then if you're not going to do it, if you're not going to adjust it once every year or two, then just put it in the total stock market index. So I think under 50,000, I guess the only difference that I would make, instead of saying 100% in the U.S. total stock market, once you get maybe to 15,000, 20,000, if you had 75 to 80% in the U.S. total stock market and 20 to 25% in the total international market, that'd be fine. So maybe I am changing. Maybe I'll add that distinction at 20 grand. You can make that split and diversify international. And part of the reason I'm more interested in international is because it's done so poorly. I know, right? It's kind of counterintuitive that you would hear me say that. So I employ a little bit of a contrarian philosophy. I accept the mathematical reality of regression to the mean. And when large investments, and I don't mean large like large dollars, but all of international or all of the U.S. or large cap growth versus small cap value. These are not market sectors like finance, oil, banking, real estate, things like that. But they're really big segments of global, in this case, stock markets. The same also. That's totally different for the bonds, I think. But for stocks, it has this regression to the mean, and international has underperformed quite significantly the U.S. market. So since 2008, where I was more like 5 to 10% international, I've been gradually changing that. And now I'm 20 to 25% international. And it kind of depends on you. I mentioned on the show about a year ago, Vanguard is at 40% international, and the generic recommendation advice that they give through webinars and podcasts, and some of them I have listened to. For calendar year 2018, I win because international did so poorly. It was far better to have 20% than 40% in international. Yay us. But I think at some point, international will regress towards a more normal return pattern, which is something closer to 10%, or maybe have a year or two where it does above that level. So it's nice to have exposure there. I will do some kind of year-end wrap-up in January of what all the different segments have done, like I have done in the past. I have had a couple of people ask me to talk about the market volatility. I'm not going to go into that too much because that generally doesn't worry me, doesn't bother me. The market made money for the first 6 to 8, maybe 9 months of the year, and the last couple months have been pretty brutal. Down 10, 15%. This shit happens. This is why, if you're close to retirement, you have a cushion. So we can talk more about that later, but it doesn't concern me. It doesn't worry me. And if you're a client and also someone that happens to listen to this podcast, if you think that I am going to know when to sell stuff so that you don't experience any loss in value in your stock investments, you are sorely mistaken. I do not do that. I don't promise to do that. I'm not even going to try to do it. So if you're thinking, I'm going to call Phil and go, what are you going to do to protect me in case the market falls 30%? I might say, well, that's what the cushion is for. But as far as the stock part, I'm not going to do anything. I'm not even going to try to do anything because the long-term data says buy and hold. Don't jump around. Don't thrash around. Now, I have made changes at the beginning of 2018. I announced a slight increase in the cushion. At the beginning of 2017, I announced a slight increase of the cushion. And maybe even this summer, I said, maybe you should do the cushion a little bit faster. And I've also said that you should shy away from the large cap growth position, which over the last few months has lost a considerable amount of money. So these were nice things to kind of tweak it in the right direction. But if you have a general overall quality design in your investment portfolio, hopefully you're not that worried about the day-to-day, the month-to-month, maybe even the year-to-year market swings. The stock market will have really good years where it makes 40% or more, and it will have bad years where it loses 40% or more. That's how it works. But in the long run, stocks make the most money. So you want this delicate balance of having as much money of your as much money of yours as possible in stocks to make the most money in the long run. But you also want money in the cushion to protect you in the short run. When you're 30, you don't care. You want it all in stocks. Maybe you hold 5 or 10% back because you're a little nervous. Whatever. We can make adjustments. But when you get to retirement, the cushion should last you, normally I say 10 to 12 years, but I added 2 years to that over the last 2 years, and it's now 12 to 14 years. If we get a really big drop in the market, I might reduce that back down to 10 to 12 years. But that time frame allows you to wait for the stock market to come back up. Because at least in the past, it always has. If it doesn't come back at some point in the future, it may not matter where your money is because it's all going crazy. But anyway, I'm prattling on, wrapping up the Investing Skeptically segment. Take a quick break and go into our interview.
And they told me the story all about this guy named Lehi who lived in Jerusalem in 600 BC. Now, apparently, in Jerusalem in 600 BC, everyone was completely bad and evil, every single one of them, man, woman, child, infant, fetus. And God came to Lehi and said to him, "Put your family on a boat and I will lead you out of here." And God did lead them. He led them to America. I said, America? From Jerusalem to America by boat in 600 BC? And they said, yes. Then they told me how Lehi and his descendants reproduced, and over the course of 600 years, there were two great races of them, the Nephites and the Lamanites. And the Nephites were totally, totally good, each and every one of them, and the Lamanites were totally bad and evil, every single one of them, just bad to the bone. Then, after Jesus died on the cross for our sins, on his way up to heaven, he stopped by America and visited the Nephites. And he told them that if they all remained totally, totally good, each and every one of them, they would win the war against the evil Lamanites. But apparently somebody blew it, because the Lamanites were able to kill all the Nephites, all but one guy, this guy named Mormon, who managed to survive by hiding in the woods. And he made sure this whole story was written down in reformed Egyptian hieroglyphics chiseled onto gold plates, which he then buried near Palmyra, New York. Well, I was just on the edge of my seat. I said, "What happened to the Lamanites?" And they said, "Well, they became our Native Americans here in the U.S." And I said, "So you believe the Native Americans are descended from a people who were totally evil?" And they said, "Yes." Then they told me how this guy named Joseph Smith found those buried gold plates right in his backyard. And he also found this magic stone back there that he put into his hat and then buried his face into. And this allowed him to translate the gold plates from the Reformed Egyptian into English. Well, at this point, I just wanted to give these two boys some advice about their pitch. I wanted to say, okay, don't start with this story. I mean, even the Scientologists know to start with a personality test before they start telling people all about Xenu, the evil intergalactic overlord.
All right, everybody, welcome back. Of course, this is still Phil Ferguson, and you're still listening to my show. And I'm so glad that you're here. And I'm also glad that Leighann Lord is here today. How are you, Leighann?
I'm great, Phil. How are you?
We're great. We're going to talk about you, and we're going to talk about parents. But before we get dragged down into the complexities of that, tell us a little bit about you. I know you're a big star and everything, but share your email and or Skype or Twitter or whatever the hell is the thing with the kids these days. So
right. Sure. I guess the portal to all things me is veryfunnylady.com, since I'm very shy and bashful about my talents. But you guys can find me on Instagram, on Twitter, On Facebook, I'm a Leighann Fans. On Twitter, it's Leighann Lord or Very Funny Lady, as well as on Instagram as Leighann Lord or Very Funny Lady. It depends on whether your spelling is up to the challenge of knowing how to spell my name. If not, Very Funny Lady is easy. And
I was just going to say, for the spelling challenge, and I have a very soft spot in my heart for those people because I am one of them. They are me. Leighann, in this case, is Leighann. And of course, Lord, you're on your own. Well, actually, there can be multiple ways of spelling Lord.
Yes, there are.
Lord. Just four-letter. Your four-letter word.
Yes, and sometimes people, I don't know if they intentionally mishear it because they think it's, I don't know, disrespectful to have that as a last name. They swear they hear Lloyd. It's like, no, it's Lord. No E. Suck it up.
It's funny. The most common mishearing of my first name, of course, is Bill. Right? Phil,
okay.
Bill. I mean, that totally makes sense. The second most frequent mishearing of my first name is Joe.
Really?
And I have no fucking clue where that comes from. People are like, so it's Joe? And I go, how do you get Joe from Phil? And this has been over decades. This has happened to me many, many times.
Okay. So there's anecdotal evidence here that this is not just a one-off.
Yeah, it's not one time, but it's still. I don't know if I look like a Joe, or what. I just have that Joe face about me. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Leighann Lord, very funny lady. You do comedy shit. You've been on TV. You've written books, right?
Yeah, I've done. I actually sound impressive.
Well, when they do the introductions and they read all the things that you've done, it does sound impressive, and you've worked hard, and you've achieved a sliver of fame. How's that sound?
I like that. That is actually accurate. A sliver of fame.
Yeah,
I'll cop to that.
Yeah, and when you're doing 10,000 seat auditoriums, let me know. We'll have you on again.
Yeah, very soon. Very soon.
Well, you were just at, what was it, the FFRF or the...
Yes, Freedom from Religion Foundation's annual convention, the 41st, I guess, out in San Francisco. It was fantastic. I had so much fun. And until I was waylaid by Jehovah's Witnesses, who wanted me to explain the meaning of Freedom from Religion Foundation. But other than that, it was awesome.
Yeah, it's one of those things that people regularly say, so you're an atheist and you don't believe in nothing. Why do you guys have meetings? Go, yeah, you got me.
I don't even understand that train of logic.
Yeah, you got me. I it's for the sex. That's why we go.
It's funny. I've begun online dating, which I'm probably quickly going to stop doing.
I can imagine.
Although, I mean, just the jokes alone for me have been almost worth it. But I'm very upfront because I want to be really clear, on who I am and what I'm looking for. And so I put that I'm an atheist. And I had one guy who couldn't understand what that meant because he liked me and he sent me a message and I looked at his profile and he said that he's religious. And I'm like, I'm an atheist. And he goes, so you don't believe in God? Good. Yes. No, I don't. And he's like, not even a little. Like, oh,
not even a little. Yeah.
Not even a little. Like, he just couldn't really, I don't know, deal with it. But I would rather have that conversation before I meet you than waste time.
Yeah. I could imagine. It's not private, but many people know that my wife for many years was religious, and it can be a challenge. Mm-hmm. And I could see if something awful happened and I had to go dating again, I would probably have to put up a threshold and saying, I'm sorry. If you're anything beyond a Unitarian on the scale of religiosity, it just ain't happening. I can't.
Right. I mean, there's some people that put, spiritual but not religious, which means, I could win them. But when you're in your profile, when you say you're a God-fearing man looking for a woman to go to church with, I'm like, you've made this easy for me, sir. That's a no. Well,
and that's why you want to be upfront and direct in what you're looking for, because now you both did not waste any time.
Exactly. And from that point of view, I like online dating. It really helps you sort of sift through the nonsense. or the things that are your deal breakers that you're not gonna, that won't match with you.
Can't do it. And you also have a couple of podcasts. One is about science and astronomy or something like that. What's that one?
It's something like that. Star Talk with Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson, which I believe I'm mainly in the archives at this point because I haven't been on the show in a while. But yeah, seasons, I don't know, 2, 3, 4, and then a few episodes of the TV show on Nat Geo. So, but that's how most people, I guess, in this community have come to know me. Very nice.
And then the other podcast, which, if I can say this without being rude, is much smaller listener base.
Yes. It's niche. We'll call it niche.
It's nichey, and it's about parents and parenting. And what is the full name of that podcast?
It's actually called People with Parents.
People with Parents.
Yeah, and it's about the role reversal that happens between adult children and aging parents. And it's just these little, sometimes funny, mostly poignant stories that are happening between me and my parents as we're going down this path of what the hell. Like I want to write a children's book or an adult children's book that says, where do old people come from? Because man, this was a big surprise, and I know it shouldn't have been, but it was.
Yeah, it can be, and I think it was the recent episode you were talking about your dad and him driving.
Him what? What did you say?
Him driving a car.
Him driving, or more importantly, not driving.
Yeah, and so why don't you give us a little info or little insight into that and what happened there?
Oh, sure. Well, over the last few years, his driving got scarier. I'd sit in the passenger seat and like I said this on the podcast, like I was like, wow, so this is how I'm going to die. Yeah. And he thinks he's fine, and he's totally not fine. And how do you have that conversation? How do you take away the keys? And the first time that I was able to do it was a couple of years ago when he had a heart attack. He had a mild heart attack, and the doctors were like, no, you can't drive. And he was absolutely furious with me. Like, I've never had my dad that mad at me, outside of my teenage years. But we're talking about the restriction of how one defines oneself, your freedom and your mobility, and your adulthood, being able to do what you want when you want, and have your child essentially be the person that is the heavy and is the bad guy is not a comfortable situation. But what happened most recently was different than I expected. It would be. He literally just had not been driving the car. He didn't go anywhere. And I would want to say since last December, he just didn't drive the car. And I didn't bring it up. I figured if I don't say anything, he won't ask about it. And occasionally he'd go out to the garage, but it got to the point where he didn't even remember how to start the car. Yeah. And he'd ask me, and I'd say, if you don't remember how to start the car, that's a sign.
I'm not telling you.
I'd be very gentle about it, because a lot of what I talk about in the podcast and a lot of what I try to accomplish day to day is riding that line between being in charge and respecting their autonomy, what the decreasing amount of autonomy they have, and trying to be mindful and respectful of that. So, he's out there trying to figure out the car, and at the same time I'm going, so, hey, what do you need? He goes, I want to go to the store and get such and such. I'm like, okay, I got that. So it's the sub thing. He doesn't need what he's going for. He really wants to go out. But what ended up happening was time ran out. The lease on the car was up. And he was actually had fallen. He was in rehab while I had to take the car. I was the person that took the car back in and turned it in and had the license plates. And I'm like, we're not getting another car. No, we're not leasing anything else. And so it just sort of ended that way. Like, there's no car, so there's no issue. And I thought he would actually be really upset about that. Because I've learned not to mention things ahead of time until he brings it up. And he asked me, he said, hey, what's going on with the car? And I said I had to turn it in. The lease was up. And he was very reticent about it. He was like, okay. I guess I don't need a car. He goes, I want a car, but I don't need a car. And I was expecting this huge explosion. it didn't happen. I guess we had those arguments already in the past, and he didn't feel the need to add another one. But I know this is something that families struggle with, the diminishing ability to drive. And what do you do?
I know that my mom, who passed away about 2 years ago, but she got to the point where she was driving these really long and complicated routes on side streets because she had lost the confidence in her own driving ability to go on streets with big stoplights and fast cars. Because she would be driving at a speed where she felt comfortable, and she's no hurry to get anywhere. So on a road that's marked 45, she's going 25 or 30.
Ugh.
And of course, other drivers pass her, cut her off, honk at her, and that doesn't help an elderly person feel more comfortable behind the wheel.
No, it does not.
But it finally sunk in enough that she would go on, streets through the neighborhoods at 10, 15 miles per hour because everyone else was generally doing that. And you kind of get to the point where you're like, Mom, and I can relate, unfortunately, multiple occasions. I've done this for several parents, step-parents, and a couple of grandparents. My wife and I have been involved at like 6 different times doing this, where at some point you kind of have to say, I don't think you should drive anymore. And right. I don't know how I would handle that. I'd hope I'm going to be real mature and adult about it, but
probably not.
In this country, I mean, if you're in Europe or somewhere where there's buses and trains everywhere, that's one thing. But if you're in suburban America, you got to have a car or you're stranded.
You kind of do. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's my weird little argument that maybe that's why Manhattan should be one big senior living facility. Because everything's walking distance. They have elevators. It's close by. You can actually get out and not need a car. But if you're in the hinterlands, if you're in the outer boroughs, like you said, if you're in suburbia, it's akin to being stranded. And there are alternatives, but my dad doesn't have a smartphone, so he's not just going to Uber anywhere. These practical solutions for our lives don't really work for seniors. This is not a senior-friendly environment now. Well,
one of the things that I started to hint at before we started recording, and I wanted to save it for now, and now that you've sparked my memory, I remember one of the worst things that I ever did was I talked my parents into getting a computer.
Oh.
And I would get calls from my dad with things like, how do I do this? And I go, you have to right click. And he goes, what the hell's a right click? Like, no.
Yeah.
And he'd say, I'm looking at the TV and there's pictures on it. I was like, okay. What do you mean by pictures? Like the background, the screensaver? Are you talking about the icons for the programs? And he's like, there's like 30 little pictures that are like an inch tall. And I go, okay, so these are, I'm assuming you're not in a folder full of photographs. I'm assuming you're looking at the desktop and you have icons. I don't know what any of that means, son. And I'm like, oh my God. So, you're trying to do this over the phone to get him through something he wants to do. And that's rough when you you don't share a language because they don't know those words.
And if wherever they've left off in their sort of technological, knowledge is where they stay, which makes me a little nervous because I'm like, I've tried Snapchat. I really don't get it.
Oh, yeah.
And you see how easy it is to be left behind. And it's crazy to see in my dad because he was sort of my tech guru. When something went wrong, he was the guy that fixed it. He was my geek squad. And to see that change was very sobering. And he claimed he wanted a smartphone. And I don't have a lot of parenting skills. And so he wore me down. And I said, okay, I got him an iPhone. And it literally sat there on a table in the living room for months.
It's like a Seinfeld episode. It's a tip calculator. It's not.
Right.
It's not a tip calculator. I paid $1,000 or $500 or hopefully $200 or something for it. But did you ever experience this? And I've had this a few times, and I was curious what you thought. A parent or even a relative, grandparent, where you recognize that they're older than you. No problem. They're more mature than you. That they've had more years than you. And, a little time passes, sometimes even as little as a few weeks, maybe a few months, and then you see them again, and all of a sudden you go, holy shit, they're old. When did this happen? Have you ever experienced that yet?
Many times.
Okay.
In many ways. I think the first time for me, and I actually talked about this in the last episode of the podcast, was when the first time my dad got lost when he was driving.
Oh.
Yeah, that was a big one. And, I'll cut to the chase. He eventually found his way to Burger King because, that's the beacon for him. And he called me, and I went to pick him up, and I was angry. I was really angry because this had been going on for hours. I would call him. He'd hang up on me. He wouldn't pull over. He wouldn't tell me where he was because he didn't know. So he makes it to Burger King, and I drive there. It's just, like 2 miles from the house. And the whole way, I'm just furious. And I pull in, I jump out of the car, and I'm storming towards the restaurant, and I see this old man standing inside, by the door. And in my head, I'm like, who's the old guy? And I'm like, holy crap, that's my dad. Like, everything about him was old man. And I'd never seen him that way before then. He was older. He was my dad, but he wasn't an old man.
Yeah, I've had that a few times. I know after my dad had a surgery on his hip, all of a sudden, I was just like, I mean, I knew he had more years than me. But what day did he become grandpa? The old dude.
Right. Right. I think for my mom, it was the first time that, there was a joke in my house that I could never be taller than my mother. No matter how tall I was never taller than her. And it was a day that I realized I was taller than her. And when I hugged her, she felt less. If that makes sense.
Yeah,
there was less of her there, and I didn't know where the rest of her went. Because my mom was a big woman. She was, oh gosh, I don't know, size 18 at one point. She was a woman of substance and of force. And I remember, like, why do I feel all of you and you're not all there? It was actually quite, again, terrifying, sobering.
Yeah, I have had that experience before, and I've had people get lost, and not just in a car, but even just walking in their neighborhood.
Yeah,
and not able to use the things that we like you mentioned. You can't use an Uber because you can't use the smartphone. How are you going to hook up and everything and do all that to get an Uber if you can't really even figure out how to make anything beyond a phone call on your phone?
Right. I mean, I think we forget because we take these tools for granted, but there's a level of mental acuity that has to be present for one to be able to use these things. Like I talked in the podcast about when my dad was driving, he had 2 portable GPS units that would give him competing directions. And that's as annoying and unsafe as it sounds. And there comes a point, and you aside from it being annoying and unsafe, that doesn't help an elderly person who doesn't understand spatial relationships anymore. Or if there's a detour and they can't take the way that they're used to, and now they have to go off the beaten path, they're done for.
Sure. Have you had any problem with telemarketers on the phone?
I will say, thankfully, no.
Okay.
Because my dad is incredibly grumpy. Well, he's grumpy now. He didn't used to be. Yeah. And he can't hear very well. So, unless a telemarketer is willing to scream their pitch, it doesn't happen. On the bad side of that, he hangs up on the people he's not supposed to hang up on. So the doctors would call to confirm an appointment, and he'd think they were telemarketers, and he'd say, call my daughter, and he'd hang up. So I had to go through the effort of making sure that all the doctors had my phone number because we were missing appointments. I'm like, why are appointments canceled? And he didn't know why they were canceled either because he thought he hung up on a telemarketer.
Sure.
So that was an adventure.
Oh, I know my mom would get terrible telemarketing calls, and, had one of those times where she called me and she goes, I think I did something wrong. Oh. And you can't be mad, just like at the Burger King thing, because they're going to shut you out because it's embarrassing enough already.
Yes.
And I said, okay, Mom, well, just tell me what happened. And she'd tell me about how a nephew had called her and he was stuck in Vegas and needed money, so she wired him some money for an attorney.
Oh no!
And as she told me about it, then the last thing she told me that the money went to like Puerto Rico or some other country, and I was like, why would you send the money to Puerto Rico even though you think that he's in Vegas? So first thing, I called the nephew, and he's fine. He's not anywhere near Vegas. And I called my mom, and I said, if they call you back, hang up on them immediately. And a couple hours later, they called, and they said, hey, we got the money, but now there's a complication because the reason he's in jail is because he hit a woman, and she was pregnant, and she's losing the baby now, and the courts won't let him go. We need more money. And so once they pinch you for, and it wasn't a small amount, it was like $1,500 that she sent. You're never going to get back. And so we filed a police report, but it's gone. And so sometimes people say, why do these telemarketers keep calling me? Because they make money doing it.
Yeah. Eventually. If they call 100 people and they get 2, they're earning their keep, I guess.
Well, I mean, if you live somewhere with really bad economy and you can scoop up $1,500 a couple times a month, that's real money.
Hell, I'm going to start calling people.
Yeah, there you go. And so one of the tricks we did for my mom is we switched to a VoIP, voice over internet protocol phone.
Oh.
And we had to get a new number. So we had to do like you did. We had to contact all the doctors, all the suppliers. We ran the 2 phones in parallel for a while. And if someone called her on the old phone, she could say, hey, this is my new number. And it took us a few months to do that. But once we got rid of the landline, she got no telemarketing calls because telemarketers look at a landline, and listeners, if you did not know this, a landline screams, I'm old.
Yeah, I guess it does.
Leighann, do you have a landline phone?
Not anymore.
See, I don't have a landline phone. My kids don't have landline phones. The vast majority of people under 50 have gotten rid of their landline phones and have cell phones.
Yeah.
But if you're in your 70s or 80s and you grew up your entire life, I mean, people up until recently, some people still paid lease payments on the rotary phone that's worth like $5 on their desktop. They paid 35 cents a month to lease the phone. If you can have an elderly parent, you switch them to a voice over phone, the telemarketing stops. It was magic.
I'm actually that's tempting enough for me to investigate it, but I'm also in the position of it's really hard to make changes with the stuff that concerns them.
Oh, I know. And in this case with my mom, it was the same physical phone. So you had to add a new piece of hardware that I put in, but the phone, she picked up the same cordless, handheld, wireless phone and could walk around the house. It was just a different number. And she had moved a few times in her life, so she was familiar with getting a new number. But, you know, any little change, like we also had a case with another relative that we thought maybe there was some Alzheimer's going on until they moved. And then we knew. And you would literally get questions like, I need milk. And you're like, you need milk? We just went to the store, and you open up the fridge and there's a gallon jug of milk. Well, here, you have milk. Oh, I couldn't find it earlier.
Wow.
Because the milk for 20 years had always been in the same spot, in the same room, in the same refrigerator, and now you're in a different kitchen. And the refrigerator's in a different place, and you just can't connect in your head. Where would the milk be? And you're just like, wow. So
yeah. You know, it's funny when my dad had his most recent fall and he was in the hospital for a week and in rehab for about a month. I'm like, okay, this is my opportunity to clean up. You know, not necessarily anything I wanted to do, but it was really becoming sort of the geriatric edition of hoarders.
Yeah.
You know, he was never very tidy. My mom was sort of the one who did that, but she doesn't, you know, she has Alzheimer's, so she doesn't have that ability anymore. And he doesn't even, he's not even trying. I really don't think he has the ability, or even the inclination now. So stuff is just everywhere. And his organization method, even to just make it even more difficult, is to leave things out. So if he can see it, he knows where it is. But now everything's everywhere. So I went in and I called myself doing the right thing, you know, getting stuff up off the floor, throwing away what was clearly garbage, you know, organizing things, putting things in categories, but still out so he could see it.
Yeah.
And still waiting on that thank you.
Yeah.
He was very upset because things weren't the way he left them, but he left them a mess, an absolute mess. And I tried to sort of respect at least the area that things were in, but I guess that wasn't enough. But I also had to make concessions to what he needed to be able to move around in the house.
Sure. Have you had any problems or come up with any solutions for pills? Any issues there?
Lots of issues there. In many ways, my mom is easier, at least where she is in her journey now. We have someone here who looks out for her. We're still trying to get something in place for my dad. Part of the problem is so I found out last week, I kept saying, you guys haven't sent a home aide here. And they were like, yeah, we did. Your dad refused service. And I'm like, when's the guy with dementia able to refuse service? Like, what scam are you running here? So I'm in such an idiot. I'm the one that every week I set up their pills. You know, I go through, I put it in the morning, evening for both of them.
Yeah.
So there's someone there to make sure she takes her pills. My dad is sort of on his own. I have a note for him. I write things down for him. And so I remind him what time he's supposed to take his pills. But now he's got to remember to look at the note. So I'm not sure how effective that's going to continue to be. I went on Amazon because Amazon answers all questions. And there's a clock that you can get that's a pill reminder, and you can set it for whenever you need to take your pills, and it gives you an audible reminder. It's 9 a.m. It gives you the date. It tells you it's time to take your morning pills, and it'll continue going off until you press the button, and it's a big red button.
Oh, I like that.
I loved that. It'd be great if it worked for him.
Because he can't hear it?
Well, he can't hear it. I have it on loud. He couldn't hear it because the TV's on loud.
Yeah.
And then at night, because he takes his pills, you know, late at night, he hears it, but he doesn't know what it is and where it's coming from, and it just agitates him.
Yeah, you know? It's one. So, did you solve it?
No, literally, today I picked it up and just took it out because I'm like, okay, this is a solution that I tried and it didn't work.
Yeah, I like that solution a lot because the first time we did this with my wife's grandma, I said, and before I even get into the pill story, my wife got very upset because her grandma was lying to her about little things. And I'm like what? And she said, I asked her what she had for lunch and she told me. And then an hour later, I asked her what she had for lunch now 2 or 3 hours ago. And she'd give me a different answer. Mm-hmm. And I said, oh, well, okay, technically she's lying, but she's doing it because she doesn't have any idea what she ate. Mm-hmm. And so she would do this thing like, I had some ham, corn, and orange juice. So she would pick like a main course thing, a side thing, and a drink. Because when you give someone an answer like that, it sounds like, oh, that makes sense. That's something I would expect that you would have eaten. Mm-hmm. And so they're still intelligent and they can still come up with a plausible answer. But then if you ask them an hour later, they'd be like a grilled cheese, some green beans, and a glass of milk. And I was like, she's not trying to lie to you. She doesn't want to say, I don't know, because as soon as someone says, I don't know, the response from a young person that's never dealt with someone with Alzheimer's, unfortunately, is, how can you not know?
Yeah.
And you can't do that. You can't.
And there's a bit of a learning curve. Well, there's also a bit of denial. And then there's a learning curve with, you know, what it means to be older, what it means to lose cognition, what it means to have your short-term memory just blown out, and how you deal with that, especially when that person was fine for most of your entire life.
Yeah. So
you sort of have to relearn who they are and their abilities or lack thereof. And that's a very difficult adjustment.
One of the other most annoying things I've seen with people with dementia or Alzheimer's is the older person asks a child a question and the child says, I already answered that for you. Mm-hmm. Well, yippee-ki-yay to you that you already answered it. they clearly don't know the answer or don't remember what you answered, and it's still an important enough question for them to ask again. Don't be a dick. Just answer the question.
I will say again, early in the process, I remember there was a part of me that says, why are they being annoying?
Yeah.
Like, why are you there's a part of you that thinks they're doing it on purpose. And it's not until you sort of really pay attention and you do a little research, or maybe you then get a diagnosis and start doing research and you go, oh, they're not trying to be annoying. That's not what's happening here. And I think that's more horrifying than thinking they're doing it on purpose.
And that's kind of what gets to your podcast and kind of why I'm doing this. And some listeners are going to think this is the most boring show ever, but some people are going to go, oh my God, I know what Phil and Leighann are talking about. Now I know what to do. There's no systematic process to teach adults, 40, 50, 60-year-old adults, what to do with a 70 or 80-year-old adult.
No.
And there's a lot of things that I learned by trial and error, and there's a lot of things that I've seen other relatives do, and I go, oh, wait a minute. The reason they're doing that is they're not being a jerk to you. They have Alzheimer's, or the reason right after they eat, they want to go to take a nap and sleep and feel really awful is because they might have diabetes. There's different things that are more common with age. The one I was thinking about with pills with my wife's grandma, I asked my wife, I said, if she can't remember things, how does she remember to take her pills? And my wife says, she's got a system. And I said, oh, well, what is the system? Well, when she takes her pill, she flips that bottle over so it's upside down so that she knows that she took it. And I was like, okay. Well, that's...
Oh, wait.
Do you know what happens next?
Yeah. It stays upside down. Yeah. So she's always taking it.
Yeah. And I said, when does she turn them right side back up? And she's like, what? And I go, if you flip the pill over and it's upside down, that means you've already taken it, and you walk by. And of course, now we're assuming that, it's a pill you take once a day. What if it's one you take twice a day, or 3 times a day, or 4 times a day? Or my dad had this medicine that you had to take this little, it was basically a capsule, and you had to stick it in this container, and then you had to pierce it because it had a powder inside of it. And then you had to inhale really hard, and the pill would spin, and it would spin out all the powder, and you would suck it into your lungs.
Oh, that's crazy.
And it's really clever, right? It's really clever. But I'm like, the people that at the pharmaceutical company that designed this, have they ever worked with the senior citizen? Because I'm telling you, this pill is not going to fucking work.
Oh my God.
It can't.
And here's when I realized that the same way that a child needs a pediatrician is the same way that an older person needs a geriatrician. Folks who are familiar with that population. Yeah. Because regular doctors, they mean well, but they're in fix-it mode. And so they'll prescribe things or suggest things, and it's like, do you have any old people in your life? Like, you're saying, okay, do they exercise? Are you serious? You want them to split a pill? You want them to get out and jog every day? Like, what are you saying?
Yeah.
It's like you just try to hear yourself talk. This is not how that population works. Like, the other day I was trying to open a Listerine bottle, and it's childproof. And I started struggling with it, and I'm like, holy crap. If someone has arthritis, if someone isn't all that sharp, like how, or have that strength anymore, how do you break into jars now? So we have an entire population that we are just ignoring or not, really seeing to their needs at all. There's this huge disconnect. You're either young and healthy and amazing, or we don't see you, which is very frightening.
Yeah.
I wanted to before I keep forgetting, you had mentioned if I had worried about telemarketers.
Yeah.
The thing that I actually worry about are the folks that ring the bell, who come by, because when elderly people are alone, they get lonely. Yeah. So they open the door and they want to talk to people. And it's like, that makes me incredibly, incredibly nervous. I just had an incident here, and I happened to be home. This is why I don't sleep well anymore, because my ears are sort of attuned to everything that's going on in the house. And I heard the front door open because it's, alarmed, so it beeps. And I heard people sort of come in, and I'm like, and I knew I wasn't expecting anybody. There was no nurse coming. There was, none of that. And so I didn't want to, but we have a 2-family house. I went downstairs, and there are 3 people with their backs to me, and one is praying. And my first thought was, oh my God, my dad has let the Jehovah's Witnesses in. And so I go, excuse me, who are you? And one of the ladies turns, and it turns out they were a group from my mom's church that make visits about once a month. And so I'm like, whew, okay, that's fine. Because my mom was Catholic. I mean, I don't think she understands what it is now. But, it's someone coming to pay a visit. And I'm fine with that. But they did that. They did communion. They wrapped it up. And the priest turns to me and he goes, are you Catholic? Why haven't I seen you in church? Are you Catholic? And I said, well, not anymore. And the look on his face, it was tossed between being confused and being derisive. Like he kind of like rolled his eyes at me. And I said, thank you for judging me in my own house.
Yeah. Amen, sister.
And he said, well, no, I wasn't judging you. And I said, well, that's what your mouth is saying, but you should tell your face. And the other 2 ladies who were with him were like, oh, crap. Like they were just trying to hustle him out the door. Because I was not going to, kowtow, defer, or let up on this. And I'm like, thank you for coming to see her. But you're not here for me. And he's like, well, have you been baptized and confirmed and all that? And there was one of the ladies there who's known me since childhood. She was like, oh, yes, she has been. Good day. Bye. And I said, yeah, I've seen the show. I'm not impressed. And he just couldn't
stop himself.
No, he really, really couldn't. No. And it's like, you cannot, again, I am appreciative that someone's coming to see my mom and dad. Yeah, I get it. But to have that look of derision in my house, I'm like, yeah, dude, I'm not letting you slide. Because this was fresh off of coming back from the Freedom from Religion Foundation convention. And they're like, hell no.
Well, I know we had a situation shortly after my dad died, because he died 5 years before my mother. I went to visit my mom, and she's like, there's some guy that you need to call. And I go, oh, who do I need to call? And she goes, his card is on the refrigerator. I'm like, okay. And I go, this card? And she's like, yeah, he wanted to talk to you. And it's like, okay. And look at the card, and it's a life insurance salesperson. Oh. And I was like, was this person at the house? And she's like, yeah, he gave me a whole bunch of stuff to sign. And I'm like, where is this stuff? And she's like, it's right over here, and he's coming back on Friday. And I was like, well, holy crap, right? So I called this number, and I get a hold of the guy, and I said, I understand you were at my mom's house. And he says, yes, I was. And, we were talking about putting her funds in an annuity so that she would always be protected. And I said, well, I'm kind of in the biz, so I understand annuities. Yeah, I'm taking care of the finances. You don't need to worry about it. He goes, oh, it's no worry. We're there to help. And I was going to bring a friend this time, and we're going to talk about this and this. And I said, which reminds me, you stopped at the house. How is it that you came to be physically at my parents' house? And he says, well, your mom invited me. And I go, okay, how did she invite you? Psychically? And he goes, well, we were talking on the phone, and she invited me to the house. And I go, okay, how was it you were talking to her at the house? And I said, she's under the impression that you have a life insurance policy with our family. And he goes, oh, no, that was just a misunderstanding. We don't. And I go, okay, so how did you call the house? Oh, she filled out a card. It must have been at like some fair or what are they, like a home and garden shopping conference thing. Man. And I said, that's very interesting. I said, I noticed that you're 5 miles from us. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come over there, and I want to see that card. And he goes, oh, we don't keep them. Once the information gets put in the computer, they get shredded. And I said, okay, I see what's going on. And in my head, I'm thinking, you read the death notice that my dad died in the newspaper. Mm-hmm. And I said, oh, okay, I just want to let you know that you don't need to come by the house anymore. And he goes, oh, it's not a problem for us, blah, 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 blah. And I said, okay, I'm so sorry. I phrased that poorly. Don't come by the house again. And he goes, oh, it's really not a problem. We're here to help. And I said, okay, I was still phrasing that poorly. I'm so sorry. if you come by the house again, I will call the police and I will report your agency to the Securities and Exchange Commission for the state of Illinois and file a formal complaint against your office. And he goes, we will not be coming by the house again. And I said, thank you. I appreciate your understanding. That was so easy, wasn't it?
You know, in the things that you said that nobody talks about, you know, nobody sort of prepares, you know, 30, 40, 50-year-olds to deal with 70, 80, 90-year-olds. Many of those things are sort of medical and financial. And I remember having a conversation with a young woman, while I was in the hospital. I was, you know, there with my dad. She was there with her grandmother. And, you know, you get a little, you know, friendly. And she said to me, do you have your papers? And I knew instantly what she meant. That's the power of attorney. That's the healthcare proxy. That's the HIPAA.
Yeah.
And I said, well, yeah, I do. And very sadly, she did not. She's a granddaughter. She was simply there. You know, she was, you know, helping her grandmother out, and she was the one who was there when she got sick. And the daughters, you know, her aunts, were the ones who had the papers and were not sort of taking care of business. And, you know, that sort of thing becomes very important when it comes down to who has to make decisions when they're not able to do it. And they don't have to be physically incapacitated. They could just be not mentally there or sick or whatever. And you've got to be able to step up and legally prove that, you know, you can do this. And there was a point where my handbag, which is already ginormous, was extra heavy because I was walking around with every legal document I needed. You know, I'd walk into the hospital and they go, okay, and who are you? I'm the daughter. Here's my power of attorney. Here's my HIPAA. And they would go, okay, it's fine. We trust you. Well, I'm like, no, you're not supposed to trust me. Here's my information.
I'm delighted you brought that up. So, yes, listeners, highly recommended if you're dealing with anything like this, or even before you have to deal with stuff like this. Have your parents, talk to your parents about getting a medical power of attorney. You might even want to get a financial power of attorney. It's a separate document. Mm-hmm. You want living wills. You might want to make sure that you have a will.
Mm-hmm.
And
how about that?
If you have a larger portfolio, a larger thing, you might want to trust. That's you hire an attorney, not somebody like Phil. But have these documents, and you might have to redo them every few years because in our family, we've had situations where we're there to represent somebody, and you hand them the medical power of attorney, and they go, "Oh, this is more than 5 years old."
Oh, crap.
And I go, well, there's no time extension. There's no timeout on this thing with the state of Illinois. Yeah, that may be true with the state, but for our hospital, it has to be within the last 5 years or we can't accept it.
Wow.
Wait. You're just making arbitrary rules that supersede the laws of the state? That's our policy. I'm like, oh, for sake.
Exactly. Exactly.
So there's little things like that. The other thing that I wanted to talk about, I don't know, and we talked about telemarketers. Have you had any problems with mail, junk mail?
Phil, I am sitting here right now in my office, and one of the things that just weighs on me are the piles of mail that I'm surrounded by. Because, you know, there's my mail, and then there's stuff that they still get. And some of it's important, like 25%. You know, maybe 30, and the rest of it is just crap. And every time I whittle down a pile, 2 more spring up. And it actually is like a cloud over my head. Tomorrow is my day. My shredder is here. It's plugged in. It's ready to go. Yeah. Tomorrow is mail day because I can't handle the piles anymore.
I have a solution for you.
Oh my God, do you?
Yes. Now, it's not phenomenally easy. It takes a few steps. And I only learned this because my mom would get 9 to 10 inches high of mail a week.
Yeah.
And she would want to go through everything. And in there is a bill that she has to pay.
Yes.
But she's got to sort through all the crap to get the thing. And so she started donating money to charities. And then, of course, she gets more mail. And she moved. And when we changed the address, all the junk went away. But then it came back.
They find you.
And then what I did was I had all of her mail forwarded to a post office box so that I could pick it up instead of her, and I would bring it to her at the end of the week, and I would only bring her what she needs.
Ooh.
And then when she passed away, I still wanted to get her mail, and the post office suggested that I forward everything to my address, but then I'm like, I'm going to get all her shit too.
Right.
So the solution, and this is a little bit, because I would talk to the post office and I'm like, can I pay a fee to stop getting the junk mail? I'll pay real money. Just stop. And they're like, no, we don't have a way to know what is junk mail and what is not. And I said, well, it's funny because when she moved, the junk mail stopped coming. And they go, oh, that's because we don't forward it. And I said, so you fuckers just lied to me. You have a way to know, you know what gets forwarded and what doesn't. You know what's junk mail and what's not. So don't tell me you can't, but they don't want to turn it off because that's the revenue stream. So if you have elderly parents that get a ton of junk mail, what you do, the first step is you change their address to a post office box.
Okay.
And everything will get forwarded to the post office box. And then what you have to do is go back and you can filter there so you can keep it kind of clean for what's going there. And then you go to all the people that need to send her stuff and make sure you have the post office not forward stuff anymore. But I mean, I'm phrasing this so poorly. You'll end up forwarding all the mail, and then you create a new address for her that is the same address. Is that making sense? And so,
no.
So they'll have to change the address. So like at some point, here's what it is. At some point, the forwarding stops.
Right.
But all the people that send junk mail, they've changed her address in the system or his address in the system to the post office box. So the junk mail's not being forwarded. They corrected the address. And after they've all corrected the address and they all send it to the post office box, then you go individually to people that you need to get the mail from directly and say, I know you got told by the post office to forward it to this new address, the post office box, but I'm telling you now, send it back to the street address. And they'll update their system and they'll go back to sending the mail to the street address like they used to. But it takes I think the forwarding only lasts 6 months. So
I think so.
So when the forwarding ends, you tell everyone that's important to send it back to the street address, and all the junk mail has forwarded itself into the post office box. And then you go through and hopefully the stuff that's significant falls down in number to less and less and less stuff. And then you eventually close the post office box and all the junk mail doesn't know where to go and it just stops.
Wow. I hate to sound morbid. They might be dead by then.
Well, I understand it. And it's not a great solution, but it's a solution. It's a solution. Because I would do that. And it got to the point that I had to forward my mom's email, not to this senior apartment complex that she was living at, but to a post office box so that I had to physically go get it because she would walk down to the little mail station in the building and she would get her mail and then it would confuse her and it would take all her day and all this stuff. And I was just like, we need a better system. But
yeah, you know what? I need to put some brain power to this as well because again, we 2-family house, 1 mailbox, which for, a long time was fine.
Yeah.
But now, especially if I'm not home or I'm traveling, my dad gets the mail. And he knows well enough to put my mail aside. He'll put it on like my outer step for me, and that's fine. But he takes all of his and my mom's mail, and he doesn't always know what it means. Like this looks like a bill, and he'll open it up and he'll make a note. Oh, this is a bill. But then he doesn't pay it. He's to the point now where he doesn't pay it. But then sometimes it's a bill that I don't know about. Like anything I know about, I've kind of set it up. It's automated. That's fine. Sometimes stuff slips through and I'm like, what is this? And I can't pay it if I don't know what it is. So he'll get it, he'll open it, and his filing method is everything's on the floor. Yeah. It's just on the floor. So occasionally I've got to breeze through and see stuff on the floor and just scoop it up and pray it wasn't something super critical, that if you don't respond in 30 days, one of those. And then he will fixate on the oddest things. Like he got a notice. It wasn't about jury duty per se, but it was a survey. But it's from the courts
allegedly.
And so he wants to fill it out. And so I took it, but he kept asking me for it. I'm like, here, I gave it to him. He still can't figure it out. But I'm like, okay, but you have it. And I almost want to take it and write on it and mail it back and go, he's 85. What else do you want to know? He can't help you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I don't want to take all day. I know you have a show to go to tonight. Where are you appearing in the near future in case my listeners are in your area?
Oh, wow. Well, you guys, I live in New York City, although I do travel quite a bit, and I keep my schedule up to date on my website. My calendar is on my website, which is veryfunnylady.com. And I know tonight, I'm really excited actually about my show tonight. I'm in a place called Don't Tell Mamas, which is comedy back there for the first time in a long time. But in terms of what I'm doing, where I'm going to be, that's always the best place to check that, because I do update it regularly, is my website. I know in January I'm going to be at the Hopewell Theater in New Jersey. I'm going to be at Brouhaha Comedy Club in Hartford, Connecticut, February 1 and 2. So I get around.
Yay. Well, I thank you very much for coming back on our show, and
thank you for having me back to talk about this very depressing topic.
Well, I'm just trying to think to myself, how do I make this a happy ending? But I really do hope that some listeners got some tips or ideas or things to think about, and some way we've helped somebody.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree, because there are going to be a lot of people out there listening who go, well, my parents are fine, and if they are, that's great. Now's the time, because fine can suddenly turn to not fine. And that's for any of us, so while the sun is shining, so to speak, take some of these ideas, and implement them. And in the meantime, just love them.
Love them. I like that. Well, we'll end with love them. Leighann, thank you for your time. Have a great show tonight.
Phil, thank you so much.
Behold, the atheist's nightmare. Now, if you study a well-made banana, you'll find on the far side there are 3 ridges. On the close side, 2 ridges. If you get your hand ready to grip a banana, you'll find on the far side there are 3 grooves, on the close side 2 grooves. The banana and the hand are perfectly made one for the other. You'll find the maker of the banana, Almighty God, has made it with a non-slip surface. It has outward indicators of inward contents: green, too early; yellow, just right; black, too late. Now, if you go to the top of the banana, you'll find, as with the soda can makers, they placed a tab at the top. So God has placed a tab at the top. When you pull the tab, the contents don't squirt in your face. You'll find the wrapper, which is biodegradable, has perforations. Notice how gracefully it sits over the human hand. Notice it has a point at the top for ease of entry. It's just the right shape for the human mouth. It's chewy, easy to digest, and it's even curved toward the face to make the whole process so much easier.
You're listening to The Phil Ferguson Show.
Well, I do hope you got something useful from the segment on aging parents. If you have any really clever ideas that we missed, let me know. Send me an email, phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com. Of course, if there's someone that you want me to interview, you may also send me an email. It takes some work to find people and schedule them and interview them. And if you have great ideas, especially if it's someone you have a contact with, I would love the assistance and or suggestions. Just keep in mind, not everybody is right for the show. And some people, no matter how nice I email them, don't want to talk, because I've had lots and lots of people I thought about having on the show. They're busy. They got their own lives to run, and they don't want to bother coming on my little rinky-dink show. A couple of quick reviews here on Stitcher. 5-star review from Chris K. Okay, anyway, started listening to this podcast after one of Phil's visits to the Atheist Experience, and it has turned into one of my favorite podcasts since. I like the healthy mix of atheism, skepticism, and finance. Have to admit that at first I wasn't too sure about the financial parts of the podcast. The topic seemed too daunting for me, but Phil has the gift and the passion to make it accessible, interesting, and informative. Thank you very much for doing this, Phil, and keep it up. Thank you very much for that review. And actually also have one on iTunes, if I can hit the right button here. Let's switch the view. Hang on, I got to go to most recent reviews. This comes from MacDave2. Come for the financial advice and stay for the interviews. I only wish I had something like this show to listen to 30 years ago, when it would have helped me make the most of my savings. Well, thank you, MacDave2. Of course, it can help with your savings now. And I think one of the most valuable things that I can do is particularly helping people in retirement, because having a variety of different investments, different assets, different types of index funds that go up and down at different times, as we've seen from this last year. Sometimes things go up, sometimes things go down, and hopefully one or two of the things that you hold go up every year. That's not always the case, but that's kind of the philosophy behind it. And if you are allowed to pick and choose from the things that you either add money to in while you're building your portfolio, or if you can pick and choose when you're taking money out, the net effect is a greater return on your investment. So that's some good, fun things that we can do. I'm going to wrap the show up. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate it very much. And I hope to see you out there on the road somewhere in person. Until then, ciao.